creatures that grow from small beginnings, and what we grow into depends on several factors. One is the conditions that surround us, and one is the extent to which we engage with the life within us. For the past probably 20 years more, education has become a strategic issue around the world. You know, when I was a student, nobody was very interested in what was happening in other countries in education. I mean, I was growing up in England. We didn't really care what was happening in Finland. People in America weren't that bothered about what was happening in Spain. But now governments are. Education has become a strategic issue. And it's become a strategic issue because of the nature and pace of globalization. And education has become seen as a process to encourage competition and economic success between countries. And it's led to the most corrupt and sterile form of education you can imagine for our children. Our children are suffering now from higher levels of stress than ever before. More and more kids are not graduating from high school. I hate the expression, is hate a strong word? I hate the expression, dropout. In America currently, something like 30% of kids who start the 9th grade don't complete the 12th grade. And every single child has a reason for that. I mean, there are trends, but what's interesting are not the statistics, it's the reasons individuals have. But, you know, if you're running any kind of enterprise and you lost 30% of your clients every year, you might wonder whether it was the stupid clients or your enterprise. And to call these kids dropouts makes it sound like they failed the system. And it's much more accurate to say the system has failed them. Because I don't know any kid who doesn't want to learn. You know, children are born with immense possibilities, I mean infinite possibilities, and they have a massive appetite to learn. I mean, think what happens in the first 18 months of life. Children learn to speak. Little babies in the first 18 months learn to speak, and nobody teaches them. You don't. If you're a parent, you didn't teach your child to speak. It's far too complicated. You know, you wouldn't have the time and they wouldn't have the patience. You know, it's not like you sit your child down at the age of 18 months and say, look, we need to talk. You know, or more specifically, you do. And, and this is how it's going to work. You know, you probably noticed your mother and I have been making all these noises for the past 18 months. Well, some of these are names of things. We call them nouns. There are other noises we make. They're not names of things. They're names of things you can do with things. We call them verbs. If you change the noise, you can say what you will do and what you have done. And don't worry about the subjunctive. Nobody gets it. You know, it doesn't work like that. You know, kids absorb language through their skin. You nudge them, you correct them, they mimic you, but you don't speak, you don't teach them. And by the way, if they grow up in a home where there are 6 languages spoken, they'll just learn all of those. Kids love to learn. The problem they have is with education, which is the time when we start to decide systematically to teach them things. And many of the rhythms of education are obstructive to the natural rhythms of learning. So my premise is that children are born with immense natural capacities. They have a tremendous appetite to learn, and education has become the problem. When you say what is the aim of education, I'd put it this way, that, and I'd love to know what Sadhguru has to say about this, coming from a different cultural perspective, but my take on this is this, that all of us are born into 2 worlds. You know, that there's a world that existed before you came into it. It was there before you were. It's the world of historical circumstances. It's the world that exists whether or not you exist. That will be there when you've gone, according to where your metaphysics take you. But there's another world that exists only because you exist. It's the world that came into being when you did. It's the world of your private consciousness, the world of yourself, the world of which it was once said there's only one set of footprints. But the world of your own anxieties, hopes and aspirations and talents and fears and ambitions and so on. Education is filled with the outer world. And most of the problems that children experience are to do with their inner world. So as I see it, the role of education is to help children understand the world around them. That's clearly essential. And also the world within them, so that they can become, you know, compassionate, fulfilled, and engaged individuals. And for me, the great deficit in education at the moment is the extent to which we fail to engage the child's inner world and recognize how much they could become if we invested enough of our time, effort, and own conscious understanding into what their possibilities are.
Sadhguru, so much of your work has been about helping people blossom to their fullest potential, to live a full-fledged life. I remember visiting your amazing Isha school, which reflects many of the values that Sir Ken has described. And I'm wondering if you can tell us, in your view, what makes for a perfect school? And how does Isha or any of your schools address the natural longing in a human being to know?
I'm glad that there's no perfect school anywhere, because this aspiration for perfection is very death-oriented. It's something that most people have missed. The nature of life is, it's never perfect. Only death is perfect. Never has death happened imperfectly. Never has life happened perfectly. If school is about life, then there is no perfect school. Having said that, as someone said, not him, somebody, from England. No, I'm seeing him as a representation of England. Someone said that education is a necessary evil. It is a necessary evil because there is a resident evil in the world. We have very convoluted aspirations, in the sense, largely, most part of the education is trying to manufacture cogs for the larger machine that we have built. Our children are the fuel, unfortunately. We have to put them into some slot where they'll function well. And when we see the world is no more about people. The world is about the economic engine that we are driving. It's become bigger than us. We have to keep the engine going. We're scared to stop it for a moment. We have to keep going. Now, the problem is this, that we have created a world, if our economies fail, we will be depressed. If our economies succeed, we'll be damned for good. I feel it's better you're depressed. Now, talking about a school as a way of manufacturing cogs for the machine, there are many ways to do it. Every nation has its own system. If I have to shape you into a particular shape that you must fit into a particular machine, it's a cruel process. But now we can't let the machine fail, it needs spare parts. Constantly it has to absorb, and humanity is the spare parts. So our children are the fuel and the machine parts which go into this to run the larger machine, that's one aspect. So this is why I have addressed education in three different dimensions, which people around me are still trying to grasp why these three different things. There is one form of education which is called Isha Vidya, I think they might have showed something about that. This is for the rural masses in India, where the problem is they're in an economic and social pit which they cannot get out by themselves. The only ladder for them is education, employment-generating education. But there are reasonably well-to-do people where they might have gone through that in the previous generation, but this generation need not think about how to earn my living. They have to look at how to expand who they are. So we have Isha Homeschool, which caters to that, because this kind of education costs money. So only people who can afford it can do that. Costs money means not like how it costs here. By Indian standards, it costs money. And there's another form of education where people are not interested in serving this machine or that machine, they want individuals to blossom. So we have Isha Samskriti, where there is no academic education of any kind. They only learn music, dance, art, Sanskrit language, Kalari, which is the mother of all martial arts, and classical dance, classical music, yoga, English language as a passport to the world. So these children are a treat to watch. This is how children should have been. Just to give you a glimpse of what it is, at the age of 15, for 3 years they go into monastic life. Compulsorily they must go on, compulsorily they must come out at 18. They cannot continue. They'll take a monastic life for 3 years, but after 3 years they cannot continue, they have to discontinue that and get back to normal life. This is for discipline and focus, but you can't make the entire world like that. This is an ideal to work towards. The idea of this kind of schooling is just to develop human body and human brain without any intention. Without any intention as to what they should become. They can become whatever they want. Only thing is, human body and human mind should grow to its fullest capability, and attention is the main thing. An indiscriminate and unprejudiced attention is what we're trying to evolve in the children, that they learn to pay attention to everything the same way, that you don't divide the world as something as good and something as bad, something high, something low, something divine, something devil, something filthy, something sacred. No, you learn to pay the same attention to everything. This is the fundamental of this form of education. What will they do? What will they do is the aspiration. So I guaranteed them one thing, 12 years, if you enter the school, the commitment is for 12 years. You have to, 6 if you come, 18 if you can leave. So they asked me, what will the children do? I said, one thing I'll assure you, we will not give you a certificate in the end. They said, Sadhguru, what? I said, did anybody ask me what is my certification? Only in the American embassy they asked me. So I said, no certification, because doors in the world may open little slowly for you, but when they open, they stay open. Not because of qualification, but by competence you open doors. It is just that everybody is in a mad race, your children should do better than your neighbor's children. This is a disease.
I agree. I didn't know you're unqualified, by the way.
That's the…
I actually have to go.
That is the only qualification I have, and that is the only striving in my life, how to remain uneducated. Because this is the biggest problem. Why education has become a problem in the world is, people become who they are in the world because of what they have gathered. This is a very unfortunate situation. Right now, whether it is material things or knowledge, whatever information they have gathered, it makes them who they are. Now, who you are and what you have gathered are two different things. This is the distinction we are trying to bring into child's life in our schools. Whatever you may gather, it doesn't matter. What you gather is just information and things. Information is a thing by itself. It should not determine who you are. Who you are is determined by a different process, what you gather by a different process. So when I keep repeating to everybody, lot of these people feel ashamed, my guru is uneducated, they try to say, no, he only says that he's really educated. What I'm saying is, whatever I have gathered does not determine who I am. Because the biggest problem in the world is this, from the day you are born, all kinds of people are trying to teach you something that's not worked in their life.
I think if I can say, one of the major problems, excuse me, I agree with all of that, is that we didn't have systems of mass education as we know them now, pretty much until the middle of the 19th century. You know, they were invented, made up.
Part of industrialization.
Yes, it was part of the Industrial Revolution, and it was associated with the big move from the countryside into the cities to provide a workforce for the industrial economy. It's very straightforward from that point of view. It was a massive piece of social engineering. It's why the system is shaped the way it was. We needed a majority of people to do blue-collar work, which is why we had a broad base of elementary education, and a relatively small group of people to do clerical administrative work in suits, which is why we had a small university sector. And the system was created that way. In Britain, when I was at school, at the age of 11, while we all took an exam, I'm sure Ian would remember it, it's called 11 plus. And it determined at the age of 11 which type of school you went to, at which sort of high school, a grammar school or a secondary modern school. It was really an IQ test, but people thought it was a blood test, that told them how smart they were. And actually it was just a capacity to do that type of test. And like a driving test, you could get better at it. And I mean, a lot of people were trained to do it, and they got through it. But the consequence of it is that we created this kind of system where there were a small group of winners, and they did very well by it, but the vast majority didn't. And part of the problem, as I see it, is that the system of education is burdened with certain ideological assumptions. One of them is a whole set of ideas about intelligence. So the whole ideal of Western education is to get people to university. And therefore, and it's because the universities abrogated the system to their own purposes. And therefore, we have in the system this deeply mistaken assumption that intelligence is the same thing as academic ability. And academic ability is very important, but it's a very specific capacity, the capacity to do certain types of deductive reasoning, certain types of critical discourse. But the upshot is that if you're not very good at that, you're thought not to be very smart. Because the truth is, if you create a very narrow conception of ability, you create a very big conception of disability and inability. I just said, as we're doing personal stories for a second, I'm from Liverpool in England, and I'd mention one thing. I went to school across the city centre from the Liverpool Institute, which is where Paul McCartney was at school. I didn't know him then. I'm sure some of you people do know him quite well. But I wrote a book a few years ago called The Element, How Finding Your Passion Changes Everything. And I interviewed lots of people for the book, one of whom was Paul McCartney. And I tell you this because I think it's very important you don't leave here today unaware of the fact that I hang out with Paul McCartney. Anyway, Paul, as I call him, was I asked him, I interviewed him for the book, and I said, "Did you enjoy music at school?" And he said no, he hated it. I said, "Did your music teacher think you had any talent?" He said, "No, not really." He does, doesn't he? And then one of the other people in the same music program in the same school was George Harrison, the lead guitarist of the popular music group, the Beatles. And I said, did your music teacher think George had any talent? He said, "No, not really." I said, "Well, look, would this be a reasonable comment that there was this one music teacher in Liverpool in the late 1950s who had half the Beatles in his class, and he missed it?" He said, "Yes." Well, it's a bit of an oversight, isn't it? So, anybody stand out in your class this year, Mr. Wilcox? Not really. Nobody leaps forward, frankly. What I mean is, if you create this narrow view of ability, then you automatically suit all this other stuff. I mean, Sadhguru may remember this, but in the 50s, there was a big polio epidemic, that ran right through America and Europe, and I got it. I was one of I'm one of 7 kids. I was the only one in the family to get it, and the only one in the street to get it. Despite my vigorous attempts to cross-infect the entire neighbourhood, I thought you're coming down with me. But anyway, I was in hospital, and I ended up going into special ed from 5 till 11, and that's what they used to do. So I was in a school which had lots of kids with polio, lots of kids with cerebral palsy, partially sighted, blind, deaf kids. I was sitting next to one kid in school who had a really bad case of cerebral palsy. And it's a terrible thing to deal with, because if you don't have it, if you can to move your arms around, you just have to relax muscles and contract them. You don't think about it. But if you've got cerebral palsy or affected by it, you're fighting your body all the time. So you're doing this type of stuff. And if you try to speak and it's affected your face, it's you sound as if you're talking nonsense. And of course, you may be talking absolute sense. It's just you can't get the sounds out. Anyway, so the guy sitting next to me in my final year at the school couldn't grip a pencil in his fingers, but he could grip it in his toes. And he had beautiful writing, better than mine, actually. Was this handwriting? We don't know. We don't know. But the point is, we're surrounded by people like this. I was saying, I mean, my classroom at school was like the barroom scene from Star Wars. You know, there were kind of people in various degrees of decrepitude, you know, being brought in. But nobody was interested in what people's disabilities seemed to be. What we're interested in was what they were good at, and if they were smart or interesting or what. And the fact is that many of the things that they had difficulty with weren't what really defined them. But because there's this narrow view of ability, if you have trouble writing or speaking, it's assumed that you have some associated mental incapacity, which is why you get this big conception of disability surrounding it. But if you reframe the conception of ability, suddenly you discover all these talents and possibilities that are inherent all the time. Now, I mention it because it's a dramatic example, at least special ed is to me, of what happens all the time in general education. All kinds of kids are told they've got problems who don't have them. They're created by the system. And it's the problem of the system that we need to address, that if you reframe ability, all of these difficulties that people seem to be suffering from suddenly disappear. If you find the things they're good at, if you do as Sadhguru is suggesting, if you create an environment which is holistic, which is addressing your spiritual development, your physical development, which recognizes that human life is not linear, it's organic, and it will take many different courses, then you have a completely different set of conditions under which people will flourish. And it's the fact that the conditions themselves, which are industrial in character, create problems for kids, which they then begin to rail against. So we now have a system based on competition, narrow view of ability, and one in which people are being medicated to stay with the program. They're being pathologized for losing interest in what is essentially very boring stuff. We sit them down all day long and wonder why they fidget. And there are different ways of doing it, better ways. I mean, for me, it's plain as day, really. You know, education is not one of those things like an incurable disease and we can't figure out what to do. We know what to do in education. It's about taking this thing to scale. But taking it to scale doesn't mean replicating it, because, as you say, there's no perfect school. Actually, there are no two schools alike, but like there are no two individuals alike. But there are principles you can apply everywhere. And getting those principles in place, to me, is the big challenge now.
As we're looking for an evolution of a human being through the education system, the education system should be always an evolving process by itself. When we think in terms of a perfect school, we're thinking of again fixing it somewhere. That's what needs to change. As one can develop, because Ken mentioned this IQ test, I'm saying, as one can develop muscle by doing certain things with the body, one can develop intelligence. The fundamental aspect of developing intelligence is, right now, there are some studies, I don't know, you must tell me, I'm not an expert on these things, which say if a child goes through 20 years of formal education and comes out with a PhD, they say 70% of intelligence is irrevocably destroyed. Because
Sorry, I have a PhD, I don't know what you're suggesting.
I'll leave that to you, Ken. So, essentially what's being said by the studies is we are mistaking information for education. By deadening the brain with too much information, definitely the possibility of intelligence is lost. This is why I said what we accumulate and who we are should remain separate. Who I am should not be influenced by what I have accumulated, whether they're material things or information or impressions. This is of the world. I would like to little differ in what was said in terms of child's inner world and external world. What we are mistaking to be inner world is still external in my perception, because a child's fears, ambitions, aspirations are all external, inspired or infected, I would say, by the outside situation. It is not natural aspiration of life. Natural aspiration of life, if you look at it, if you leave someone uninfluenced from outside, the natural aspiration is always to expand, not to become less. But if you look at today's form of education, because it's purely intellect-based education, there's no other dimension of intelligence in it. And I think in this part of the world there is a serious mistake that intellect has been mistaken for intelligence. Your intellect can function only with the backing of your memory. Or in other words, your intellect functions with accumulated information. If I take away all your memory, your intellect is quite useless by itself. But there are other dimensions of intelligence within you, which does not need the support of memory. If education systems do not focus on activating these dimensions of intelligence, you will find factory workers, you will not find a genius in every home. What you need is an innovative intelligence. Today when I use the word innovation, you think developing a new i8 phone. I'm not talking about that. Maybe we can develop a world without a phone. We don't know what's an innovation. Innovation need not necessarily mean improvement of what we have little by little, little by little. Yes, that is also needed, but that is not what life is looking for. People are not any better with phone, without phone. Maybe we're doing more things, but equally confused, equally struggling as it was before. So the point is not about what we have gathered. What we have gathered is useful in creating comfort and convenience for the world. What we have gathered is not useful for creating well-being for ourselves and for the world. If well-being has to happen, we have to access dimensions of intelligence which are not intellectual, because intellect cannot function without accumulated information. If you function always out of accumulated information, you naturally get identified with it. So depending upon what you have accumulated, you become that kind. Because you have become that kind, another kind and your kind always goes into conflict. If the purpose of education is to expand horizons of individual human beings, you can see that's definitely not happening. The more educated somebody becomes, as people get educated, they really can't get along with anybody. Not so educated people can live together, 100 people can live together. Once you become educated, you become isolated, because this is the nature of the intellect. Because you're employing only one wheel out of 4 wheels of your car, it is like that. It's like suppose you're driving on the street and you are some kind of an expert, you drive on just 2 wheels. What, Mosh, you do? You got a car for that. You're driving just on 2 wheels, maybe you're good at it, but nobody else on the street want to drive with you, they will all stop. If you're driving on 4 wheels, everybody will drive with you. So the other dimensions of intelligence have to come, otherwise the moment you get intellectual, unknowingly, in some way you exclude the world. So in a way, the way of our education has been to butcher the existence into tiny fragments, and we're trying to fix the fragments. It's not going to work like that. If education has to become holistic, there are systemic problems, I'm not saying no, but more than the systems, the people who deliver the system, if we can upgrade them in a huge way, every system can be made to work good. I have seen in India, the most rudimentary system is the state education. I have been there to these schools before we went into starting our own rural schools. I just wanted to see what's right or wrong with these guys. I found some schools are like as good as pigsty in terms of what they're producing. Some schools, same stuff, but they're doing wonderful work. So it's the people who deliver that. Whatever the system, if you upgrade the people who deliver this, if the best people, See, if we are interested in the future generations of our humanity, the best people in the world must go into teaching. But right now, the lowest grade of people are going because everything is determined by economics. How much are you paid? That's how you go. So this is where what I'm saying earlier is important. What you accumulate should not determine who you are. As long as that is so, the economic values will rule. As long economic values rule, it's the muscle which rules, not the intelligence.
So we tend to measure what we value, and you were talking about standardized tests, but so much of teaching and learning is about relationships that imply intimacy and caring and witnessing and seeing one another with a teacher. And I know you have a story about the teacher, the doctor, who noticed that the little girl who was fidgeting was actually a dancer.
Yeah.
So how do we, is it about training the teachers, or is it supporting the teachers in a different way? How do we create inspiring teachers or give them the room to help foster all the different types of intelligence that you both have been speaking about?
Well, there are excuse me, there are several strands to education, obviously. One of them is the curriculum. I'm talking about organized education. I mean, people learn on their own and can learn informally, but if we're talking about organized education, as in the schools that Sadhguru is describing or the schools you've been involved in, there's always a curriculum, which is what we want people to learn. So a big part of this argument is we need a different sort of curriculum. At the moment, in America, for example, we have a very narrow curriculum that's based primarily on a fairly impoverished view of science, technology, and math. I say impoverished because math can be a fantastically invigorating and interesting discipline. Years ago, I asked a professor of pure mathematics at the university I worked at how you would assess a PhD in pure mathematics. His intelligence had gone at this point, obviously, but
Only 70%.
only 70%. But but with a small shard of it that was left, I said, to him, how would you assess a PhD in pure math? Actually, first I said to him, how long is a PhD in pure math? Because I'd never seen one. And he said he'd seen one recently that was 20 pages long. Like 20 pages of math. Page after page of math with equals at the end. And I imagine I've never seen one. So I said, well, how would you judge one? Presumably it's right. You'd be annoyed, wouldn't you? Spend 5 years doing a PhD in pure math, comes back wrong. See me. And he said, no, they're normally right. I said, well, how would you judge one? And he said there are two criteria. There's originality. In other words, it's how creative it is. I'd like to talk a bit more about creativity in a bit, but it's about whether it breaks new ground. But the second I loved, he said it's aesthetic. I said, why does that matter? He said, because mathematicians believe that mathematics is the purest way we have of describing some of the truths of nature. And since nature is inherently beautiful, the more elegant the proof, the more likely it is to be true. You could be talking about a sonata or a dance or a poem. And of course, mathematicians do feel that way. To a mathematician, mathematics is a beautiful abstract language like poetry. And the problem people have is they don't speak math. If you don't read music, if you look at a page of notation, what you see is a visual puzzle. If you read music, you don't see a puzzle, you hear a symphony. And it's the same with mathematics, that mathematicians who speak math see a symphony. They don't see a puzzle. And so a lot of the problem in mathematics is it's a literacy problem. We have phrasebook math. It's like trying to court somebody with phrasebook French. It's just not a very good idea. Take my word for that. It doesn't work out. So part of it is that we have a limited conception of these disciplines, a fairly impoverished view. And what I'm arguing for, and it's implicit, I think, in what I understand from what I've read about Sadhguru's schools and what he's been telling us, is you need a broad curriculum that recognizes that education has a whole range of functions and that we have to address physical development, spiritual development, our emotional development, and all of that is tied up with a bigger view of consciousness. And therefore you need a school curriculum which has the arts, the humanities, the sciences, technology, not incidentally, not in a hierarchy, but equally and co-equally important. It's important for every reason, and also because for some kids that's where their real lives are going to lie. That's where they will discover themselves most fully. The second part of education is pedagogy, which is how we aim to teach people these things. And I think you're right. I mean, pedagogy, teaching, is the most important part of it. I mean, the reason Sadhguru is having the effect he's having on the world is because he's such a brilliant teacher. Teaching is what this is about. And teaching is not something that can be reduced to direct instruction. Teaching is not about telling people what to think. It's facilitating knowing. It's creating conditions where people will come to understand for themselves by probing them, questioning them, raising their curiosity, probing them so they might go in a different direction, giving them some tools, some techniques, and to reduce it to a process of delivering information to people. I really don't like this language that's got into education of delivering the curriculum. It's like education, some branch of FedEx. You know, it's not. Great teachers know that instruction may be part of it, but the larger part of it is enabling, facilitating, piquing people's curiosity, engaging them, and inspiring their imaginations and seeing the possibility in something. It's a very sophisticated process. And one of the reasons that our education systems stumble is precisely because we've demeaned the profession of teaching. We haven't respected it in the way that we should. We don't compensate people in the way they need to be in order to concentrate on the job and do it properly. And, you know, and the best teachers aren't necessarily the ones with the most degrees. On the contrary. I mean, I know all kinds of very smart people with degrees who can't teach at all. And it's the big mistake that we've made. And the third bit of education is assessment. Well, assessment is important. I can't think of any education process that doesn't benefit by people making assessments of it. But assessment's not testing. Assessment is about making judgments of what's going on and whether it's worthwhile or it isn't and how people are progressing. All great teachers do that. They're sensing whether this is happening or not. You know, and you don't have to give people numbers for that. And what's happened, I think, in America is that we've ended up with a very narrow curriculum which has been compressed because there was a piece of legislation passed here, was it 20 years ago now? Almost, called No Child Left Behind, which is one of the great pieces of modern irony. And what happened was that the government decided that America was falling behind in the international race in education, and the country had to compete, and the children were the foot soldiers in doing this, and that the way standards were to be raised was through standardized testing. It's a terrible mistake to confuse standardization with raising standards, I think. But then what happened was they released this opportunity to the publishing companies. I looked at this recently. So on the one hand, you've got conformity is one of the big principles of the current system. Well, if you want conformity, then you need compliance, and that's what the standardized testing movement's about. And this is a business. That's the point. It's a business, and it's really stifling our children at the moment. In 2013, we looked at some of the figures. The National Football League in America, which is not, of course, football, as we know.
I'm a soccer fan.
Exactly. And we have to call it soccer because they appropriated the word football. It's not right.
Don't tell me you're from Leicester.
What?
You're not from Leicester.
I'm from Liverpool.
Okay.
It's near enough. But you know, it's rugby, isn't it, in armour? So, but the NFL was a $9 billion business in 2013. The US domestic cinema box office in 2013 was an $11 billion business. In the same year, the education, testing and support industry in America was a $16 billion business. It's massive, you know, so it's a business. And that's what's squeezing the life out of our kids. Now, the reason I'm saying this is that governments have taken the view that the way you raise standards is by focusing on the curriculum and on testing. And the opposite is true. The only way you improve education is by focusing on teaching. Because in the end, it's children who are trying to learn. It's students. You're trying to get students to expand and to learn. And that's an expert personal job. As soon as we lose sight of the fact that this is a very personal process of cultivating interest and curiosity and talent and ability and all of those things and an awareness of the world around you, if we lose sight of that and the role of teaching, then we end up in the mess that we're in. But the good news is this can be changed. It is being changed. But I just want to say, too, that a lot of what you talk about, I absolutely, totally agree with. I mean, I agree with most of it. I'm not saying there's some bit I just think is nonsense, but because I haven't heard all of it. But this couldn't be more important.
With a PhD, I expect that.
Exactly. Exactly. Can't grasp all of it. But it couldn't be more urgent, you see. I mean, one of the figures you quote, and I do too, is that we currently face on Earth challenges which are without precedent in the history of humanity. I mean, on the one hand, you have exponential growth in technology and its impact on culture, on economy, on the way that people live. It's revealed all kinds of possibilities, many of them miraculously good. As you said, there are things we're capable of now we couldn't have even contemplated 50 years ago. The big problem is that our spiritual development seems to be lagging a long way behind our technological capacities. Secondly, the population now is accelerating at a point where, well, we're already the largest generation in the history of humanity. For most of human history, there's nobody around, really. It took a whole of history to get to 1 billion people in 1800. In 1930, it was 2 billion. In 1970, it was 3 billion. Between 1970 and 2000, the population of the Earth doubled from 3 to 6 billion. Right after the Summer of Love, as it turns out. You can't tell me it's a coincidence. And we're now at 7.4 billion, heading for 9 billion by the middle of the century. And we don't know if the Earth can handle it. Actually, we know that it can't. There was a really good program on the BBC a few years ago about how many people can live on Earth. It was called How Many People Can Live on Earth? And it was presented by David Attenborough. They're very good at titles at the BBC. But they concluded this, that if everybody, because we all need, you've made the same point, Sadhguru, that we all need food, fuel and water to survive, and air to breathe. And if everybody on the Earth, they concluded, consumed food, fuel and water at the same rate, all 7.5 billion people, at the same rate as the average person in India, the Earth could sustain a maximum population of 15 billion people. So we're halfway there, we're 7.5 billion people. Of course, we don't all consume as they do in India. They said if everybody on the Earth consumed at the same rate as the average person in North America, the Earth could sustain a maximum population of 1.5 billion. And we're 5 times past that. That's on current methods of production and consumption. So we are heading to an abyss here. And if we don't change course, by the middle of the century, we're going to need 4 more planets to make this work. Now, the interesting to me is, as I know it is too, that these problems aren't being caused by the rest of life on Earth, they're being caused by human beings. And it's a problem of consciousness and of creativity. We've created these problems, so we either have to
by reproduction, a lot of people are thinking they're being creative.
What's that?
By reproduction, a lot of people are thinking they're creative.
Yes, that's right. Well, that's right. You know, people talk about saving the planet. And I think the general conclusion has to be, the planet's going to be fine. The planet's been around for nearly 5 billion years. It'll shake us off like a rash. We tried humanity, not so good. We're going to stick with bacteria. They're fantastic. But it's a serious thing. There was a very good observation by H.G. Wells, the science fiction writer, who said that civilization is a race between education and catastrophe. And there's some truth in that. Education in the sense of developing our capacities, our awareness, and our understanding of ourselves and of each other and of the world around us. If we don't take seriously these principles, then we're condemning our children to a very, very bleak future. And the idea that all this can be solved through fueling the profits of the testing companies is hard to comprehend, that anybody takes it seriously. It's a case of terminal myopia. And so to me, it's an issue at every level. It's personal, it's about our children, it's about ourselves, it's our communities, but it's about the larger enterprise that humanity is part of. And it really couldn't be more important. And the principles that I know you embody in the schools are exactly the right ones, it seems to me. That's what this is about. But there isn't a single way to do it. As you said, there's no one perfect school, there's no one particular way to do it. Circumstances vary, but there's some principles. It's about conditions, it's about having a holistic view of humanity, of how children's growth and potential, recognizing the power of teaching, and recognize that you need to get these balances right, and that we can do it. But it couldn't be more important that we get on and do it.
A lot of it has been articulated by Ken, but what I would like to say is, in terms of my experience of school, I went to school only when it was absolutely necessary. I had very innovative ways of staying away from school. Because right from my childhood, one thing that somehow got stuck in my head was, if someone is saying something which means something to them, however simplistic or stupid it is, I'm willing to pay full attention. But if someone is saying something which doesn't mean a damn thing to him or her, but it's some big stuff, I'm not interested in that. Because if you're not interested in that, why should I listen to something that you're not interested in? So essentially, this instruction business comes from this. When you think you need to instruct somebody, you have assumed that those whom you instruct are of a lower intelligence than yourself, which is a serious mistake. There is sufficient scientific data to show everybody, every one of us who are 30 years of age are not as intelligent as a 6-year-old child who's just come into the school. There's substantial proof to show that. Only reason why we are looking out to be smart is because we have information and the child does not have information. So we're just showing off this information in the form of instruction. If we bring the teacher training process, completely take away this word instruction and bring inspiration and transmission as a way of life for the teachers, every school system could become a fruitful process, whatever the thing, because I don't believe we can transform all the systems around the world. But in some way, if we bring inspiration and ability to transmit whatever really matters to them, then a child would sit up and listen, for sure. As a part of this, in our schools, we made it, our school is a 7-day school. There's no holiday and no weekend. This may be shocking for America because thank God it's Friday is the philosophy. If one knows the joy of learning, I don't say why would they want to take a break. Well, activity needs to be adjusted according to, the child's ability to do things. So in a month we have 4 to 5 activity days which are not determined. It's always a surprise for a child. The child will never know when is the activity day. Today when they come, today could be activity day. Suddenly tomorrow you come again, it's an activity day. Next 15 days, it's continuous academic day. But academics are very well woven with arts, music, everything to such a point. I found that when they come to… in India system, I don't know, it's the same here probably, they do first 10 years from first standard to 10th standard, and then there's 11, 12, which is like a pre-university kind of thing. Once they come to 11, 12, they all want to get into professional colleges. In India, you don't get into a professional college unless you have 99.5 percentage, okay? The Delhi University has the legend of refusing children who got 100 out of 100, okay? Where are they supposed to go? I don't know. They got 100 and they refused because there's no space for them. So, this Marx madness will catch up and the parents will go on overdrive, and we have spent 10 years bringing art, music, culture into their lives. Everything will be dumped and just mathematics and science is being done whether they like it or they don't like it. So in the last 2 years, I made this 11, 12 into 3 years. I said it's 3 years, if you want to come, you come, otherwise you leave it. because we invested so much in art, music, culture, everything. Now the moment you come to 16 years of age, you drop everything and go into professions. You are a doctor who cannot sing, you're a dangerous doctor, believe me. Yes? You're an engineer who doesn't understand the engineering of your own body, that's why you don't dance. If you did know the engineering of your body, very effortlessly you would know how to move. So, we made this into 2 years, into 3 years. So people said, 1 year later my children will go, my neighbor's children are already in engineering and medicine. I said, this is how it is, this is not a race. Education is not a race. 1 year later, what's your problem? You are not in that condition, he has to earn a living at this age. 1 year later he will go more mature and more complete. So we did this, and the amazing thing is, almost 90% of the parents want their children back in the school. 1 year extra for the same education. But we brought many aspects of leadership, management, business which are not in the curriculum, and above all, music, art, theatre in a big way. And it's working out wonderfully for the children, they're coming out much more rounded out. And when the school started, the first question that came was naturally, me being who I am, because education is not my full-time involvement. So people said, so Sadhguru, you're going to give them a spiritual teaching. I said, spiritual teaching is for the stupid who lost life sense. People like you, I said to the parents. People like you who lost the fundamental life sense, you need a spiritual teaching. If you allow human intelligence, if you know how to nurture human intelligence without influencing it, because teachers think they have to influence, parents think they have to influence, religious teachers, of course, they want to influence. Intelligence need not be influenced, it just needs to be inflamed all the time. But everybody wants to influence. This wanting to influence human intelligence comes from, I think, in these parts of the world, there is a religious thread in the education system of very strong sense of opposites. Something is God, something is devil, something is heaven, something is hell, something is evil, something is good. This is so strongly set up in people's minds. Naturally, they want to influence because you think they will join the other party. Like how the two political parties in the country look like two religions as far as I'm concerned, the language that's being used on the news channels. In my perception, the political parties look like two different religions to me, because it is such strong opposites. No, that's not what a democracy was about. Democracy means today you could vote for this, tomorrow you could vote for that. As it was necessary, you would shift. No more shifting, people are already clearly identified, this is me, that is you, finished. Maybe the people were telling me only 6% travels. Next 47%, 94% is fixed as two different religions in the country. This is very much present in the education mechanism, that we have strong sense of opposites. This is where I think there is something that education systems in the world can pick up from the East, where we don't have a strong sense of opposites, because our gods are devils also, our devils are gods also. Somebody who looks like this is… what is beautiful, what is ugly, you cannot determine in the East because everything is one big happening. I think if you want to nurture human intelligence, this strong sense of opposites have to go. There is nobody in this room who is 24 hours good or 24 hours bad, isn't it? You can confess with me, it's okay. Yes. Nobody is 24 hours good or 24 hours bad. It's just when you're conscious, you function in a wonderful way, when you're unconscious, you may do something lousy. This happens to every human being. Now, instead of recognizing that fundamental quality of the human being and how to nurture this, because the basis of our intelligence is just this, that we can do this or that. If you were another creature which doesn't have the same level of intelligence as the human being has, a tiger will only do that, we know exactly what he will do. A hyena will only do that, a buffalo will only do that, it's all fixed. A human being can do just about anything That is where the intelligence comes in, that an active intelligence would choose an unconscious and a kind of conditioned intelligence will tend to do a certain thing. The purpose of education is to decondition the intelligence so that it becomes an active intelligence, adapting to the situations, doing the right thing for the situations in which we exist, not positions that we have already taken. That is the essence of intelligence. But today, in some way, education system is trying to condition the intelligence this way or that way, because I think there is a strong thread of religion in the background. Though it may not be spoken, I see that everywhere there is a strong sense of opposites, very strong opposites which cannot meet.
I wanted to get back to something that you both have said about creativity and curiosity in order to not be too rigid in one way or another. And Sir Ken, you said that curiosity is the engine of achievement. And so I'm wondering what happens to our curiosity as we grow older, and how do we get it back and sustain it? And how do we keep, I mean, you both have different methods for reaching this, but in terms of…
People are blind dating out of curiosity.
That's one reason. What's that?
But in terms of people, if creativity can be valued as literacy is valued, and if curiosity is kind of the fuel to keep us somewhat awake and aware,
Yeah.
how do we hold on to that as they maybe are even out of school and just continue? I mean, our
Right.
children inspire us all the time. We learn from them all the time. But as adult learners, I wonder if you can speak to that.
Well, yeah, I just want to comment, if I may, first on what Sadhguru says about opposites. I think this is absolutely right. You know, the Western rational view is very much that thinking is a process of making distinctions. It's what the whole logic enterprise is about. You know, it's this, it's that, it's fine chopping, seeing differences between things, and making things into categories. I remember writing, you know, the whole, and it's been a brilliant success in all kinds of ways. I'm not saying it's been without its benefits, of course not. We live off the fruits of rationalism all the time. But a really good example to me is this, the whole taxonomic process that developed in the 18th and 19th centuries in the natural world gave us an amazing system of classifying natural things into genus and into species and subspecies. Linnaeus spent a long time figuring out all these different classifications, and if you go to a natural history museum, you see all of this at work. You know, if you go into a natural history museum, you can go into a room, and I've done this, that's got nothing but butterflies in. And it's very impressive. You see all these butterflies in cases against the wall, pinned to the back, dead. You know, but all in species. You know, the big ones at the top, small ones down at the bottom. You go to another room, you see the beetles, not the beetles, other beetles, all classified. And it's a very interesting way to think about it. It's a way of studying these things. But if you leave the Natural History Museum and go into the countryside, you don't see all the butterflies flying in formation with the big ones at the front and the small ones at the back, and the beetles all in some separate part of the field keeping their own company. In actuality, in life, these things all mixed up with each other. They pollinate the environment that they all depend upon. That's the principle of economy. It's about relationships. It's not about separate categories. And, for example, you know, in schools we divide the arts and the sciences. But it's just a device, because in the world, all the scientists I know are deeply affected by aesthetic interests. Look at the work of engineers. Look at the. I mean, I was going to want to ask you later, if it may, if we have time, about dance. I'm a big advocate for dance, and in most school systems, dance is out of the picture entirely now, because we need to spend more time on math. And I think dance is as important as math, but it's not separate from it. These things are integrated. You know, you can talk about your liver and your kidneys as separate entities, but they only function together. It's the only way it actually makes sense. You if you take your liver out and put it on the table, it's not doing a very good job at that point. Is there something wrong with my liver? Yes, there would be. It's out of your body now. It's about how these things connect that matters so much. So I think the better way is to see that thinking is also about making relationships and making connections and not seeing separation. So we end up, for example, in school saying, are you an artist or are you a scientist? Is it going to be this or is it going to be that? It doesn't have to be a choice. So when I talk about creativity, I often ask people, I ought to get a life ready, but I do ask people how creative they think they are, large groups. And it's interesting to me how many people who are creatives, so to speak, will also say they're not really very smart, or people who think they're intelligent will say they're not very creative. And actually, creativity and intelligence aren't separate. They are functions of the same thing. Creativity is about having fresh ideas, and that's a function of intelligence. So when I say creativity is as important as literacy, it's not separate from it. But creativity seems to me to be the hallmark of human intelligence, however you describe it. And there's something prior to it, which is imagination. Imagination is the power to bring into mind things that aren't present. Creativity is putting that to work in some way. But the best evidence of the power of human creativity is that we all create our own lives. Every human life is a unique achievement. There have been 100 billion people, we think, on the planet in the past 150, 200,000 years, and every single life has been different. Every one, because you create your life. Unlike most other creatures. And human beings don't live as other creatures seem to, only in the direct physical world. We live in worlds of ideas and beliefs and values and cultural practices and traditions. And human beings invented virtual reality long before Oculus. We all live in virtual worlds. It's what the great cultural conflicts are about, when people's conception of the world come into conflict like this. The great religions tearing each other apart over ideas. And cultivating creativity and curiosity seem to me to absolutely be paramount, and it's the starting point of education. You have to help people to see that many things we think are provisional, they're contingent, they can be changed, we can think differently. We don't need to be trapped into our own biography. We can recreate ourselves if we wish to, and that's what, as I understand it, a lot of this work is about. It's giving people another sense, another realm of possibilities that they can come to occupy and inhabit. But it begins by enlivening the capacity to ask questions, the sense of intrigue about the world around us. And it's that gets killed in schools when it comes down to direct instruction, testing and multiple choice, bubble tests. It's the very thing that should give life to education that we kill off at the bottom.
This is so wonderful. I don't feel crazy when I listen to you too. I think there's a couple things. This idea of, you have someone like each of you.
I always think, I have 2 children, and I think, if we raised each child like they were the found Dalai Lama, they go to find the Dalai Lama in some country and say, or some village and say, you're the Dalai Lama, and they raise this child to think that they are this divine person. If we were to revere and raise each child in that way, I think, thinking they were the next whatever, don't you think that would completely change the way? In other words, what you said earlier about how we look at kids and we think we know so much more, but really, I think we're here to serve them.
Yeah, but if you had too many Dalai Lamas, what would you do?
Well, there'd be a lot more peace on earth, I think.
No.
Maybe.
The thing is, I know this is a common word used in this part of the world about raising children. You can't raise children, you can raise cattle. You can't raise children. This is an idea you must give up. Children grow up, as Ken pointed out in the beginning, you can only create a conducive atmosphere. They grow up. It doesn't matter, you have 2 children, how old are they?
One is almost 7 and one is 9.
Okay, you will see as they grow. Though it is the same genetics, same food, same homes, maybe same school, you will see one will go like this, another will go like that, because there are different ways to perceive the same thing. The receptivity in our mind is of different ways. If we have to get into technicality of this. In yoga, we recognize 10 dimensions of receptivity. I'll talk about 5 because the other 5 are too esoteric. These 5 are referred to as centers of sleep, centers of memory, centers of imagination, centers of right perception, centers of perversion. It is there in all of us. If it comes something, let's say the same information or a same aspect comes to all of us right now. Somebody is little sleepy mode, some of them are, little sleepy mode, they will perceive it one way. Somebody is deep into their memory of whatever their experience of lives are, they will perceive it one way. Somebody is in a heightened state of imagination, they will perceive it one way. Somebody is in a state of equanimity, they will perceive it one way. Somebody has taken extreme positions of right or wrong, they will perceive it another way. So whatever I may give you, depending upon from which center you receive, accordingly it becomes that. So you may have 2 children, same home, everything same, all input same, but one will go like this, one will go like that, because every moment how they're receiving what is coming their way. So now, the important thing is, as I said earlier, when you say picking up a young child and saying, you're the Dalai Lama, you're the spiritual teacher, with all due respect to the institution of what it is, I'm saying you're trying to influence them powerfully. An intelligence should not be influenced. An influenced intelligence is a dangerous intelligence. An intelligence which is on but not influenced will always be a solution. An intelligence which is profoundly influenced by this or that is always a divisive intelligence. It is me versus you, it will become. Strong sense of rights and wrongs, strong sense of this is it or that is it, will always create conflict, however good it may look to you. See, right now, I'll take an extreme example, an example you're not supposed to speak in America. For example, right now, there is an Islamic state. We need to look at this in reality, what it is. There is somebody out there who believes in something which is more precious to them than their life. Yes? When a man is willing to die for something that he believes, you have to at least recognize he's genuine, all right? There's no better proof. But the result of that, what horrendous things happen is another thing, okay? The consequence of that firm belief is another thing. But you have to appreciate, this man believes that there is something that he believes in which is far more precious than his own life. When I say life, I want you to look at this, whether it's an ant or an elephant, whatever life you take, every life holds its own life of highest importance. You try to catch a little ant does not think, oh, I'm just a little ant, let me die. He does everything possible to live. This is the nature of life, that is so for a human being also. This life is precious for this life, but I'm willing to throw this away for something that I believe in. I'm saying the belief is genuine, okay, but the result is horrendous. So if you strongly influence your children, whatever you think is right, don't think the result will be good.
I'm not of this generation, and I really appreciate what you're talking about.
Something visually apparent you don't have to announce. But I am more ancient than you can see.
My question is, in listening to both of you, I was wondering why the economic is not part of what perhaps, it's what I feel. I feel children who have economic wealth and more means are able to do the testing, able to go to those private schools, able. And I think that's changing the tenor of education, certainly in our country, and I'm disturbed by it. And I don't know how you guys think about that.
No, there's no question about it. All the figures support that view, that kids from middle class and wealthier backgrounds do better at school, they do better at tests. Kids from impoverished backgrounds do much less well. Non-graduation rates are much higher in impoverished backgrounds, of which there are many more than there used to be. It's true in certain of our African American communities and Hispanic communities. It's also the case that although it'd be wrong to say if you don't graduate from high school, you go to jail. That's not true. Obviously not. People often have wonderful lives. They just didn't happen to finish high school. What is true is a very high proportion of people in jail, actually over 60% of people in the correctional system in America did not complete high school. So there's a very, very considerable and significant economic dimension to all of this. And it's creating a chasm in the country that I think it has to be addressed in an urgent kind of a way. No, but America, prides itself, it keeps telling itself it's the best country in the world. We have to watch this. I mean, I live here. I lived here for 15 years. There's a reason. We like it here a lot. But nobody has a guaranteed place anymore. I mean, when there's a book written about the fate of empires, by a guy called Jared Diamond. It's a very good book. It's called Collapse. If there's a problem for Jared, it's that he gives you too much on the cover. He needs to come up with a more elliptic title if he wants to sell copies of his book, I think. What happens to empires? They collapse. We're done, really. He should have called the book, What Does Happen to Empires? Read on. Now, you see, I'm from England. I'll keep mentioning it from now on, just so that... If in the middle of the 19th century, Britain had the largest empire in human history. That's not jingoism, it's just a matter of historical fact. We had the biggest military program, the biggest economy, the biggest colonial program. If you had gone to the court of Queen Victoria in 1870 and said, this empire will be over within a generation, you'd have been laughed out of the building. But it was. By 1918, we'd lost a generation of people in another foolish war. We were virtually bankrupted by it. In 1939, it all happened again, and in 1945, it was finished. I was born in 1950 in Liverpool, and we played in bomb craters, and we were on rationing. We had powdered orange juice, powdered eggs, and powdered milk on rations from the central government with ration books. That's how I grew up for the first 10 years. It was over, completely gone. It collapsed. Now, what I'm saying is that America is living a dream at the moment, which is that all this is completely sustainable and can carry on in perpetuity, and it won't. I'm not preaching for an empire either, by the way. It's just that America is the most powerful place on the planet at the moment, and it's hemorrhaging generations of children with no economic hope, no purchase on a life that can add up to anything so far. Wallowing in all kinds of crime and drug abuse. I'm going to Chicago next week, where they have terrible problems with the education system. And to say that this isn't the consequence of America's economic policies is just self-delusional. It's a sort of flagrant disregard of the well-being of the people. That America is being hoisted on its own petard here, economically. With so much wealth concentrated in such a small group of people. And so, I'm not wishing for it, argue for it. I don't wish it on any country. It's just that this is a very serious issue for this country, as we're in this country and we're talking about it. But the good news is, as well, there are lots of wonderful people doing fantastic things. I travel around the country a lot. I'm going to Chattanooga in the morning, and they're doing a whole thing to revive their education.
As you were saying, empires end. You talked about England. Well, it was a changing situation in the world, and there was a terrible war and whatever. But empires have closed down without any major disasters like World War II. For example, in India, many empires rose which spread right across subcontinent, and they just closed down by themselves, without any war, without any external interference. And there is a significant, if you look at the thing, there was a time when 36% of the world's economy was India, where everybody wanted to go to India, and one guy made a mistake and landed up here, you know. It's a celebrated mistake. A very wrong perception of which direction is which, all right? He mistook the sunset for sunrise. He went west instead of east. Anyway, but that economy, which was over 30% of the world's economy, just closed down simply because they were doing so well and they decided they need to protect themselves. This was the biggest mistake they did. In trying to protect themselves, what was a very transparent culture, they tried to become little introvert. And they successfully did it, and that just pushed it down completely. Then came the innovations, then came all the other things. But one of the biggest undoing for India is they became introvert, they thought they had to protect themselves. Till then, they never protected themselves, they embraced everything. The moment they thought they have to protect themselves, it started going down. If you protect it, you must understand the walls of protection that you build are also walls of self-imprisonment after some time.
So what was the worst thing about school for you when you were a kid?
You asking me or him?
I'll ask you, and maybe Sadhguru will.
I didn't have a terrible time at school, I have to say. I mean, the school I went to kind of broadly worked for me. The main thing was that there were, let's say, I went to a grammar school, you know, and although I'm very keen to qualify the importance of academic work, I always rather liked it. You know, it worked for me, because it's meant to work for some people. But the thing I disliked most about it was we were put on a fast track at school, and it meant therefore we had to drop certain things. So I liked art at school, and because we were supposed to be taking our exams at 15, I went to see the head teacher, and I opted to do art, and he said, it was either art or German. That's an interesting conflict, wasn't it? And I said, what do you think I should do? He said, well, if I were you, I would do… I said, I want to do art in German. He said, well, the thing is, you can't do art in German. Which baffled me, you know, because I'd seen films of Germany and there were pictures everywhere. You know, I thought, well, presumably somebody in Germany is capable of doing art. And he said, if I were you, I would do German. I said, why? He said, it would be more useful. And I was baffled by it. I thought, why would German be more useful than art? I mean, it is useful, I'm not saying it's not, especially in Germany. I mean, it's an absolute bonus, you know, but the implication that somehow art was useless, and that's what became clear, is that the school curriculum is divided into two groups of subjects. It still is. Well, the first problem is the idea of subjects. but if you accept that for a moment, most school curricula are divided into two groups of subjects, useful ones and useless ones. And the useless ones are, you know, art and music and dance and so on, things like that. So I had to drop art to do German. It never worked out. I never got the hang of German. And the reason is, it's impossible. You cannot speak German. We know this to be true. I mean, I tried, but German's like Latin. You know, it's you have verbs that conjugate, nouns that decline, the word order has to come in the same thing. The verb has to be there in the sentence. They're long sentences. You know, so you can have a long compound German sentence with the verb at the end. So if you talk to somebody in German, it can be ages. You know what… you know, I mean, you know who was involved, where this thing happened, you know, but you've no idea what they did until the last word shows up. You're like, does verb occurs about 15 minutes later? Oh, that was what they were doing. I've absolutely no idea. Actually, I went and gave a talk at in Vienna when I graduated college. I went to go and speak at this education conference, and I was picked up, you know, at the airport in a taxi, and the guy said to me in German, "Where are you from?" To which I replied, "Yesterday evening." which I now know is a mixture of French and German. And he said, "Oh, you are English?" I said, "Yes, but I can do art." And but it's funny because when they called me about this thing in advance, they said, "You're going to give this talk to all these educators. So would you like to give your talk in English or German?" So on the phone, I acted like this was a big dilemma, because in Germany they all speak English anyway. That's the thing you get; they all speak English to you. So I acted like it was a real tear, And I said, "Look, I think in the end I'll give this talk in English." Because I should say, I took my oral exam in German at school, and I failed it twice. And the reason is that, it's a very complicated language. It's like Latin, but if you've got a Latin translation to do, you've got till next Tuesday, and a pencil. Whereas in Germany, they expect a reply immediately. And I just couldn't get the hang of this thing at all. So I did the German oral exam, and I failed it, the first one, because I spent the whole exam standing up, having misunderstood the instruction to sit down. So, fated it right away. Anyway, so when they called me on the phone and said, "Do you want to give this talk in English or German?" I said, "Look, I'll do it in English, I think." They said, "Why is that?" I said, "Well, look, there's several reasons. One is it'll be longer, more than 3 minutes, which is my conversational range in German currently. Secondly, it will deal with more complicated issues than my favourite things, it's what I'm largely confined to. And thirdly, the audience won't have to keep standing up and sitting down, because I'm still annoyed about that. So it was these choices. I had to drop it to do something I didn't want to do. We never did music at school because it wasn't thought to be relevant to the academic track. So it was that stuff, and I wouldn't over-psychologize it, but it was the lack of those things on my own education that made me think hard about why they mattered. In fact, I wanted to ask you, if you don't have to answer now, obviously, it's entirely up to you, but one of the things I've often argued is that dance in schools is as important as math. And to most Western people, that sounds like a bizarre exaggeration of something. But it's not. People are embodied. We are physical creatures. I've had the pleasure of working with a lot of dance companies. I'm the patron of the London School of Contemporary Dance, Martha Graham's company in the UK. And to watch dancers at work is the most extraordinary thing. It's not just a physical activity, of course not. It's a holistic activity. And I know in one of your schools, dance is a very central part of. I remember you saying in one of your talks that you equated dance with science. Is that right? I'm not saying it is a science, but the scientific nature of dance.
The way I perceive the world, I'll continue from the question that Max asked. What is the most terrible thing about the school? I don't know, because I was not there. I didn't suffer that.
Solves that, isn't it?
That's why I
Just don't go in.
So I remember so well, which I've shared with many people. I remembered so well that this assessment that she was talking about, a big investment in assessment, some 16 billion in assessing children, which is unknowingly grading them. And this grading, life does not respect, only schools and education systems respect. In the end, who does well in the world is not determined by how much marks they got somewhere, but they're given an extra advantage because they got so many marks. So I remember these monthly tests or the monthly report cards that were given out. I would see some children strutting around because they are first, second, something, and some children sitting and crying because they're afraid to go home. I don't know what they had in their report cards. As far as I was concerned, whenever it was given to me, I just took it and gave it to my dad. He would open and he would blow. I just didn't know what's happening. This is a communication between my teacher and my father. I never once opened and saw what is written in it. Because I thought this is something between the two of them. Because as far as I was concerned, every test paper I always gave it empty. Didn't write a word on it, or I doodled something. If they insisted, I wrote my name, otherwise I wouldn't write that either. And every time I would change the spelling of my name. Okay? Because the Germans pronounce J as A or Y. So my name starts with J. For some time I wrote it with Y, sometimes I wrote it with W. I tried all kinds of spellings. They said, according to English language, they said a proper noun can be spelled any way you want it. So every test paper, I spelt it differently, as I felt like it. Why I'm saying this is, and when the final test or exam came that I have to go to the next class, my concern was I don't want to be left behind with junior students, I want to go with my friends. So I always passed that one. So people always wondered, is 6 zeros in every test, how do you get to pass this one? I wrote my paper only for 35 marks, which is passing mark. Right through my education, half an hour bell, till half an hour bell in India you can't get up and leave. I'm just waiting for the 30-minute bell. The moment the bell rings, I'll get up and leave. Because by then I've written and I've calculated, I'm getting 37, 36, I'm done, I'm out. Always, if you look at my report cards right through, everything is 35, 36, 37, 35, 36, 37, all subjects. Teachers would beg me, you may know something else, please sit down and write. I said, that's not the point, I got 35. I'm moving to the next class and that's all that matters to me. That's the only concern, that I don't want to be left with younger children, I want to move with my friends. Except for that, I had no interest in anything. This doesn't mean I had no interest in anything at all. I paid enormous attention to every detail of what's around me, with which I developed a certain sense of geometry about everything. By the time I come to 8th standard, my mathematics paper was divided like this. It is 30 marks for geometry, 30 for arithmetic and the remaining for algebra. I never bothered, I don't understand why alphabets and numbers are mixed up. So, geometry I got 30 out of 30, everything else, arithmetic I got 5. That's about it, I went on. Because my sense of geometry is about how everything stands. When I look at the body, I look at the geometry, not at the complexion, not at the shape and form. I look at the geometry, how you're sitting. If I just see how you sit and stand, I will tell you in next 10 years' time what problems you will have with your body. So my sense of geometry came by simply paying enormous attention to anything and everything. It grew to such a point, if I just find a leaf, I could just sit like this for 5, 6 hours at a time. This is one thing I feel we have to bring to our children, ability to attend to something, whether it's important or not important is not your business. My father, being a very high-level academic excellence in his life, being a physician, supposed to be a very strict disciplinarian, which unfortunately or fortunately didn't work on me. Every day, evening 7 o'clock, 9 o'clock, we are supposed to read our textbooks, however uninteresting they are, it doesn't matter. So I would open the book like this. I find a little speck on the paper. This speck would absorb me for the next 2 hours. Without reading a single alphabet, I would sit like this for 2 hours. I wouldn't read a single alphabet on the book, but I would not be looking here and there. I'm totally with the tiny little speck on the paper. I'm saying, this is a big mistake we have done. As I said earlier, we have set strong opposites, this is important, this is not important. I think if human intelligence applies itself to every little thing will explode into a new cosmos by itself. This is what a human being is here for, to enhance life in such a way that no other creature can do it. But unfortunately, we have taken strong positions. This is important, this is not important, so it's going away. Right now, the only thing that's important is what serves our economic engine is the only important thing. This whole dissertation about German and art is just this. What is important? What will earn you more bucks? what will not earn you money? That's the question. That is the fundamental base question. If we do not remove this from our education system, there will be no education, there will only be one more manufacturing unit.
I've been hogging this microphone, hoping that I would have power to ask you a question. So, Sir Ken, you're still wearing your single-function device. I hope your daughter is now wearing a multifunctional device watch.
Yeah.
My serious question is
I'll explain.
Your comment about flawed enterprise as an education is really resonating with me, especially how the government and regulatory policies are influencing our education system. And America is really the most powerful country in the world, but we have worse than some of the third world country education system. But we also have the best universities and best boarding schools, and we have very flawed public school system as well as community colleges. If you are the single advisor to the new president, what policies would you recommend so that America becomes, again, the most powerful country in the world in our human capital, and we can make the impact moving forward?
Well, just to say, I think there are brilliant public schools in America. And public education is one of the kind of jewels in the crown of America's achievement over the past 200 years. And, I know there's a growth in charter schools and independent schools and all of that, but for most kids, public school's not their best shot, it's their only shot. And getting public schools right and not giving up on them, I think, is a really major priority, which I'd want to say to any incoming president, that there's been a clear attempt to break up public education, or at least to bring the profit motive into it. Education worldwide is estimated to be, just on the economic frontier, a $5.5 trillion business. It's why so many big publishers, independent entrepreneurs are getting into education, why so many tech companies are getting into it. It's like another gold rush. And I'm not against, people with good, interesting ideas getting involved in education, as long as we keep remembering it's children that we're dealing with and young people, and they're not there to make people profits. And I do think it's very important that any incoming president, that's the first thing I'd want to say. The second is that, by the way, the community college system is fantastic. And more and more people are going to community college because the costs of going to college have become so ridiculous. I mean, student debt now is what, $1.3 trillion, more than all credit card debt. So I think that's the second thing. I think it's an amazing asset in this country. But the third is just the things that we've been saying here about the importance of getting teaching and learning right. I mean, I'm not, and I don't think any of us shouldn't have as our priority making America the most powerful country in the world. And if I were in England, I wouldn't want England or Great Britain to be the most powerful country in the world. I think the issues are bigger now than countries, and international competitions like these aren't terribly helpful. I think we need a much bigger global and compassionate view of what we're trying to get done. Much more collaboration, much more integration of interests. I mean, for example, by common consent, the best education system in the world at the moment is Finland. And Finland set about revising its education system 40 years ago at around the same time that America did. America got into all this after the Nation at Risk report under the Reagan administration. And America went down the road of standardization and testing and narrowing the curriculum, and it hasn't worked. I mean, billions of dollars being spent with no improvement to speak of. Massive frustration on the part of teachers, principals, disaffection among kids. Hasn't worked. Finland, meanwhile, over the past 40 years, has created the best education system on earth nationally by student achievement, retention, satisfaction, engagement, fulfillment, professional respect for teachers, satisfaction of parents, stability of their communities. It's become an exemplary system. And insofar as they matter at all, these international league tables show that Finland is also close or near the top there too, in the areas that are being tested. It's a fantastic system. And it's the exact opposite. The Finnish education system is not based on competition, it's based on collaboration. Schools work together, teachers work together, universities work with schools, with parents. There's no standardized testing in Finland, as in none. Well, there's one at the end of high school. And there's almost 100% graduation rate. And it works. And then people say, well, you can't compare Finland to America. Well, in population terms, it's hard to do that because Finland has a population of, 5.5 million. America's, 310 million now. But the fact is that education in America is organized mainly at the state level. And there are 30 states in America with populations smaller than or equal to Finland. I do a lot of work in Oklahoma. There are 3.5 million people in Oklahoma. I think Vermont has something less than 1 million. I was in Wyoming recently. I was the only person there. It's just me. Just me and the driver looking for the entrance. So it's not that we should all try to be Finnish and call our capitals New Helsinki. It's not that. It's that the principles apply, and the principles are pretty straightforward. One of the things that I want to say is we talked about the Industrial Revolution and the origins of education in the Industrial Revolution, and it is. You can see it. It's about conformity and compliance, but I think the real comparison is not with industrial manufacturing. It's with industrial agriculture, which also developed during the 19th century. And industrial agriculture completely subverted the old organic systems. It was based on mechanization, which meant that you could cultivate single crop farms as far as you could see. And you go to the Midwest, it's corn as far as the eye will take you, or it's potatoes as far as you can see to the horizon. That was made possible by mechanization. The other innovation was chemical fertilizers, which made it possible for things to grow bigger and faster. And the third innovation was pesticides, because once you created these big monocultural farms, they lacked the natural protectiveness that mixed farming creates. So we had to soak these things in these pesticides to keep them from being infested with insects. And it worked, has worked for a while. The problem is that it's destroyed topsoils around the world, which are eroding at a prodigious rate. It's poisoned waterways, it's polluting the oceans, and it's not sustainable. The whole world, we all depend upon a very narrow smear of topsoil, less than a few feet thick, that doesn't cover the whole world, it just covers part of it. Most of the earth is rock or water. And without this, we can't, and it's taken millions of years for this stuff to accumulate. And industrial agriculture is destroying it. And you see it, it's what happened in the Dust Bowl in Oklahoma. It's happened in other parts of the world too. The thing about this system, it's been very successful, but it's completely unsustainable, it's unnatural. Same thing with animals. We're keeping animals in these terrible compounds. We're pumping them full of antibiotics and hormones to make them grow bigger and faster. And because they live in these terrible conditions, they cross-infect, so we pump them full of this stuff. The thing about industrial agriculture, it's all been based on output and yield. And people will tell you that industrial agriculture the interesting thing is the focus is on the plant or the animal. It's getting it bigger. It's yield and output. Organic farming is based on the opposite principle, which is they don't focus on the plant, they focus on the soil. Exact opposite thing. If you get the soil right through natural process of composting and crop rotation, you don't need all these pesticides, and you don't need to keep renewing the soil. It does that itself. And the organic farmers know that. If you get the soil right, the plant will be fine. Don't focus on the plant, focus on the conditions of growth. And the same thing has exactly happened in our school system, I think. We've had these industrial systems. We've been focused on output, on yield. We've created sterile, inhuman conditions in our schools where people are not learning, even though we're getting data and so on. And along the way, what we've done is eroded the culture of learning. And all schools know, and I'm sure it's true of your schools, so if you get the culture of the school right, get the culture right, then things grow. And it's applying those organic principles. And if we can get all schools to do that, then the problem will start to right itself.
I mean, what Ken just now said is the most important aspect. That is, education is not a production line, it's an organic happening. At the same time, from the question she asked, see, you cannot create an education system independent of the society in which we exist. Some ideal system. America is America. As he said, some principles from Finland you can take, but Finland is protected by oceans on all sides and it is what it is. And cold also prevents lots of things. America is what it is. Children are not just learning from their teachers, they're learning from the street, they're learning from the culture around. So you cannot ever develop an education system independent of the ecosystem that's happening. Are we as a society willing to in some way cultivate the ecosystem in the society which is suitable for a child to grow up in the best possible way, is a question that all of us should ask. Are we going to do what we like to do, or are we going to be conscious of how this will impact future generations? Every action that we are performing is an important thing that we need to look at. Because educating a child is not just a teacher's business or school's business or parents' business, it is happening all the time. So, a more responsible attitude towards this, a larger consciousness about this, everything that you do our children are seeing and what will happen to them tomorrow. If they start doing what you did at 18, they do it at 12, what will happen? If what they do at 12, somebody does it at 10, what happens? This is something that all of us need to pay some attention to, because education is not just happening in the school alone. Yes, a certain part is happening, but I think child learns equally from outside as he learns from the school. Having said that, this entire approach of bringing creativity, I think the most important thing that schools are missing out is exposing children to more natural phenomena in the world. They have become an isolated information cocoons of their own. They are living their cosmos through the phone. It's very, very important, I think every school invests in taking their children out, exposing them to natural phenomena and different thought process in the world, different cultures in the world, so that there is a more homogeneous approach to intelligence rather than right and wrong kind of intelligence. Why I'm saying this particularly specifically for American education system is, I see on the national news channel, people use words like good guys and bad guys. If somebody says such a thing in India, he's finished. I'm sure even in UK you cannot say that. But on the national news channel, major anchors referring to people as good guys and bad guys. I'm saying this has to go if we really want to cultivate an organic system where everybody grows to his full potential rather than being a product of a particular system. Thank you.